Hello, I'm Mantra Bose and thank you for tuning in to TTV. Now, our last few Let's Talk Legal episodes got a lot of questions on VAT, so we thought why not do an exclusive on VAT itself. And yes, VAT is coming to Oman. It's going to start from 16th April, and on this episode we're going to cover what exactly is value added tax, what does this mean for consumers, businesses, and on our show today we have two experts who are going to take us through the entire process. We have with us Mr. Aftab Khan, who is a Director, Business Advisory Services at Al Haban Management and Financial Consultants. He focuses on taxation, internal audit, governance, risk and compliance. Mr. Khan is also extensively engaged with businesses in providing VAT advisory services. Also with us we have Ms. Ola Al-Nabhani. She is a corporate lawyer at BK Law Firm. Her interests vary from arbitration to other corporate matters. Ola has also worked as a counsel in high-profile arbitration and litigation cases. She also assists BK's corporate clients in legal issues they face. Ola holds a BA in law from SOAS in the University of London, and she also hosts the Let's Talk Legal episodes, so I'm sure you're familiar with her already. She spoke about VAT in the last few episodes. So my first question would be for you, Ms. Aftab. Could you tell us what exactly is value-added tax and why now? Why is this being implemented in Oman now? Like, what is the reason? We're already struggling through so much. So tell us about that.
Thank you. First of all, I will explain about the VAT, value-added taxation system, how it will work. So it is like something transaction-based and invoice-based taxation system, and it is levied at each stage of the supply chain. And when you are saying like the transaction-based, transactions between businesses and then finally business to consumer. So B2B transactions and then finally B2C transactions. So at each level, like if producer will produce something, and as an example I will say producer will sell something to the manufacturer, then manufacturer to the retailer, and retailer to the consumer. So it is like, if we can say, supply chain until the consumer. So at each stage there will be a tax. If like the taxable, if it is a taxable supply, what like the businesses are selling, if they are taxable subject to the 5%, it will be subject to the VAT. So what businesses will do, they will charge 5% VAT and they will collect on behalf of the government. So they will collect that money and then they will pay to the government. So this is like a liability for them. They will collect and they will pay, and finally in the whole chain, like at the stage from the retailer to the consumer, then ultimately it will be borne by the consumer. So it is not a cost or burden for the businesses. So this is important thing. It is only they are agent for the government. They will collect the money, the tax, and they will pay to the tax authority. But the consumer is the one who is going to borne like the cost of this tax. Okay. So now, why? What are the factors which has triggered the introduction of VAT in Oman? So, like you can see, like this pandemic is one of the factor which has triggered. It has impacted like the government revenues, and like in terms of due to pandemic, like the tourism sector is greatly hit by that. So one of is like financial constraint due to that, and the other factor is that the oil prices. So if like for the financial year 2020, the government has forecasted like the oil price $58 per barrel. So accordingly, they have like forecasted the revenues. But what IMF has given, it was like 87 around dollar per barrel. So there was a gap. And if you will see, like currently the price is $60 per barrel. So to fill that gap, so there has to be another revenue stream from where like the government can collect the money. So these are the two factors which what we can say which has triggered the introduction of VAT in Oman.
My next question would be to Ms. Ola, and let's talk about businesses. So we know that businesses whose annual supply exceeds or is expected to exceed 38,500 is supposed to register for VAT. Now, how is this threshold calculated, and what about those below 38,500? Are they required to register?
These are the annual supplies that are calculated a year before the VAT law comes into effect, and the year after, when we talk about whether they are actual annual supplies or they are expected annual supplies. Now, for those whose annual supplies are below 38,500 Omani riyals, they may also register for VAT voluntarily, given that this business or individual even conducts commercial, industrial, any sort of professional activity, and whose annual supplies exceeds or is expected to exceed around 19,250 Omani riyals. This also applies for the estimated costs or expenses in relation to such activities of any sort of commercial, industrial, or professional activities. And of course, there is no deadline because this threshold is set for voluntary registration.
Ms. Ola, you said this is voluntary, so why should the companies who don't fall in that margin register? Do they have any benefits?
Sure. Well, the main benefit of registering with the tax authority for businesses would be to be able to charge the customer the 5% VAT over the total sale price of whatever product or service they will be providing. It is important to note, as mentioned, that businesses themselves are agents of the government, and so they are also liable to pay tax at each stage of the supply chain. This is what we call input VAT or input tax. And the only way that they will be able to recover this tax that they have paid would be to register with the tax authority, because it's very important for each invoice that goes out recovering tax or claiming tax from the consumers to include a VAT identification number, which you would only be able to have if you are registered with the tax authority.
Safta, my next question to you. How do you think this is going to affect consumer behavior? Are people going to change the way they spend their money?
Basically, like I can say, like there is good news, like for a common person, like in Oman, because like as a common person, we are buying groceries, like the food stuffs, and we are paying rents. So if you will see in the legislation, the government has given relief, and there are certain food items which are zero rated. So hopefully there will be no additional burden on the consumer in terms of the groceries of the certain food items, and as well like the residential property as well, like which is rents. Residential rents are not subject to this, so they are basically exempt. So it is like good news from the consumer point of view, and they will have the same thing. And the other thing is that like the healthcare is also exempt. So it will give like relief to the common people. Healthcare services, they are exempt sectors from the legislation. So this is like which will really help like the common person in Oman. If you compare with the region, like for example food stuff, they are not zero rated, they are subject to tax. But if you compare with like here in Oman, it is zero rated. So there are reliefs, what you can say for a common person. But yes, there will be certain something like as far as utilities are concerned, and the motorists from 16th April, there will be tax. So there will be, in the long run, maybe there is going to be impact on the consumer.
We'll talk about exemptions again in the next episode, because I just want to remind our viewers, this is not our only episode. We'll be coming back with one more episode exclusively for VAT. So before we go, Ms. Ola, any final advice from you?
Just make sure to register with the tax authority if your costs or your expenses, annual supplies exceed 19,250, because in the long run, that would benefit you as a business, and you will be able to recover all of the tax that you've paid during the supply chain.
Mr. Aftab, over to you. Do you have any advice for our listeners?
Yes, like I will say like businesses and particularly individuals get their registration done if their annual taxable supplies are over 38,500, which is like mandatory threshold for the registration, because it is coming from law. And if there is something like intentional, there is non-registration by the businesses or the individual, then it will be subject to penal consequences, and there could be like imprisonment, and there is huge hefty fines. So the registration is the most important, even for the individual. for example, who are landlords and the owners of the commercial buildings and the properties. So if they are getting rents and their commercial income, rental income is exceeding 38,500, the mandatory threshold, so they must need to get their registration done. This is important.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ola, Mr. Aftab. Well, you heard it from the experts. Whether you're an individual or a business, it is very important that you do register for VAT. We'll be back again with another episode on VAT with Ms. Aftab and Ms. Ola. Meanwhile, if you have any comments, any questions related to the subject, please drop us a comment and we'll take it up in the next episode. So until then, stay tuned and keep watching TTV.